We have a fun topic today. I say fun, it's a topic that I'm extremely passionate about. We'll use passion as the describing term. I was just telling Kim earlier before hitting record that this question both is like extremely frustrating to me, not because of the person asking, but because of the extremely prevalent ideas or like preconceived notions or myths about this particular topic. And it drives me absolutely crazy because there are still victims of this myth. And as we, as the SaaS market grows and there are more founders and more CEOs, this myth pervades. It's like a disease and it's extremely frustrating. But we're going to talk about it. Okay, so basically it all centers around how to pick the right marketing channels for your SaaS. That's the topic for today. And it's either going to be a 2-part episode where first, like, I unpack the process and kind of like the anti-patterns or like the things that don't work. And then the second part will be, we're going to go through channels. We're actually going to go through channels and talk about them. And I can already feel this is going to be 2 episodes. So if you're hearing this first part 2, if we can get it into this episode and it's not a million years long, I'm going to try to keep it to an hour total. And even then, Ryan, our podcast editor, is going to probably cut that down even more. I'm going to try to keep it to a reasonable time frame because I know y'all are busy, but I think it's important that we actually talk through this. I can actually, and speaking of like emotions and like feeling them in my chest, like I can feel my anger now rising. But what makes me angry is, again, it's never the asker. Because, the asker is always a founder who's new. They likely aren't coming from a marketing background. They're not they're usually coming from a technical background. I would never expect, a new founder, a first-time founder, or even in some cases a second-time founder to just like have mastered these concepts. But I think what frustrates me is it really is like a viral plague, and like I'm mad at the plague, not the person asking. Hopefully that makes sense.
What was this question?
Okay. The question. I mentioned the topic, but I got this question on Bluesky, and it was from a founder. And I remember I had posted, it was when we did the episode around how like marketing is actually the least efficient growth lever and all the other growth levers are actually way more important. So a founder replied very innocently, I will say, and was like, okay, yeah, that's great. But what are the best marketing strategies? And I feel sometimes I just like, I don't even see red. I see white. My mind like goes completely blank because it's the pervasive thinking behind that question is, well, there has to be a subset of things that just work for everybody. Like, it's almost like out of all the things that you could do, there has to just be like the 1, 2, 3 things. It's silver bullet thinking. That's what it is. It's silver bullet thinking. And silver bullet thinking will literally kill your company. And I think that is why it frustrates me so much, because I'm like, no, we have to rewire our brain to think differently if we want to be successful. And the question itself is frustrating, but the person asking is not. Like, I don't, can't remember the person's name, but like, let's just call them Mike. Mike, this isn't your fault. You know what I mean? You're good. I'm not mad at you. I'm frustrated though at the ecosystem that SaaS has created that makes us believe that there's a one size fits all, or that there's like a secret that people have and they're not letting us know what the secret is. And like the secret is highly tactical. It's like there's a thing that they're executing. Like there's a secret LinkedIn strategy playbook that they're running that no one else has, and it's going to work. For me, if only they would just open the doors and, show me what that was. Or like someone has the secret mission playbook thing. It's like, no, that's not at all what it is. What it is the companies that figure it out, one of 2 things happened. First, they got extremely lucky. Sometimes blind luck just happens. Sometimes it's not anything you can really precedent for. You can set a precedent for. The other way is they're actually really, really, really freaking smart about how they strategically approach things, even if they're not growth geniuses. It's one or the other. They either get extremely lucky and or early, like they're just the first, or they actually have a really good process for how they decide what to invest in, when to invest in it, etc. There's a third component, which is like you just have like a super kick-ass team, but sometimes you can have a kick-ass team in the wrong market, in the wrong, like working on the wrong product, working on the wrong problems. And it kind of doesn't matter if you have a kick-ass team because maybe you don't have the right processes actually. I've actually seen this in companies before where like the marketing team is super kick-ass, the growth team super kick-ass, but like the way that the CEO is managing or running the company or the way that the processes are, or even the culture of the company. Maybe there's no real data-driven culture. Maybe there's no real strategic culture or even like, fast execution culture. All those things can be what slows a company down. But all that to say, so like, I get it. I get where it's coming from. So Mike, you're not the problem. I need to work through my feelings. Anyway, so I want to unpack this. Because what's actually happening, again, like it's one of those three things. And really, it's probably one of the first two. Either like you're just really lucky, like the company just got lucky. There's a story, there's this company called Moments. They're like a studio management platform, like in the wellness and fitness space. And some of the very early stories of them acquiring their very first customers, they had a very, and still I think have a very aggressive sales team. So direct outbound, cold outbound was like cold outreach was their very first channel that they like really doubled down on. They grew and scaled a sales team from like 0 to like 40 or 50 in a very short amount of time. And they literally just like sent pineapples to their customers. They like, what was it? They Instacarted pineapples to their prospects and to their studios. Like, Kim is smiling right now for people listening. She's like, yep, goofy as hell. But it worked. They got lucky. They got super lucky. They scaled. I mean, eventually, like they kind of had to pivot away to something different because the people, kind of heard about the pineapples and they were like, that's weird. Don't send me a pineapple. And I also think too, like the cost kind of was like, not that it wasn't justifiable. It's actually like a relatively cheap form of direct marketing if you think about it. But I think like eventually like someone did the numbers and they were like, okay, actually we should do something different and not continue to Instacart pineapples to people. But also like, I think they were just literally like buying up pineapples. They'd hit up all these groceries. Like I think they ran out of places to buy and send pineapples from. I digress though. So sometimes you just get lucky. That's a story of luck. That was luck right there. Now they were smart, I think, to invest in the cold outreach, but their execution was what made it work. That's where they got lucky. They could have done it dumb, and they figured out a playbook to execute, but it wasn't just like a shot in the dark. They were committed to investing in cold outreach and they iterated and tested on it for months and months and months. And also too, they iterated and tested the team. So for better or for worse, it was kind of a churn and burn environment. If you didn't hit your numbers, if you didn't make it, you're out. You got replaced by someone else. They hired new SDRs, there was a lot of churn probably on like the sales team for a long time. And who knows if it stabilized? No idea. But from what we've studied, they were committed to the channel. And it was really just a matter of like, okay, what do we do to like make it work? And then they stumbled upon, they had this idea, they did it, it worked until it didn't. And they had to figure out a new way. And then other companies have a really good process and they don't waste their time and they'd rather measure twice and cut once. And that's the process that I want to talk through because you can go the other route for sure. You can hope and pray that you get lucky, or you can take a more methodical approach. And the methodical approach, I find, if you want to compete against luck, which is the name of a very famous book, but if you want to compete against luck, I recommend taking a process. Okay, so here's how we think about picking the best marketing channels for your SaaS in 2026. You may or may not love hearing this, but the fundamentals are still true. Like AI hasn't changed this. AI, if anything, has changed how we execute, but it hasn't changed how you strategically make decisions about what marketing channels to pick. So the fundamentals are still true. The fundamentals are understanding your target market. That sounds really obvious and basic, but knowing your target market like the back of your hand, understanding their awareness of the problem that your product solves, or if you're not selling a painkiller, but you're selling a vitamin, it would be, or you appeal to their higher desires or their deep desires. Maybe it's not a problem that you're solving, but it's like a lack of a presence of based on a desire that they have. But most of us are in the business of painkillers. I would say selling a vitamin is kind of rare because like the beauty industry, for example, lots of vitamins. Vitamins are vitamins, beauty's vitamins. When it comes to SaaS, like it's kind of rare that you're selling a vitamin, but if you are, then like growth is gonna be slow. And some would argue that if you are in the what's the security space? If you're in the cybersecurity space, until someone has a breach, it's a vitamin. If someone has a breach, it's a painkiller. But until you have your first breach in the cybersecurity world and you're selling cybersecurity software or whatever, what you're really selling is a vitamin, actually. Like it's the preventative versus your pain killing. But I digress. Do you understand your target market's awareness of that? Go ahead.
And so that also means you have to understand like the key core problem that you're solving for these folks.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. And ideally with as few assumptions as possible, because that's where people get in trouble. They make a lot of assumptions. They think, oh, the market's going to view my product this way, and they're going to prioritize it in this way, and they're going to react in this way. And they often, a lot of times, don't, at least in the early days. And then you kind of get used to it. But if you don't deeply understand that, that's where things can go awry. The next fundamental is once you deeply understand your target market, the next is identifying channels that they use, are engaged in from either research, behavioral studies, or your own research. Like, research can mean talking to them specifically, but it can also mean observing them from the outside, like looking in. So think about like when you do keyword research, for example, you're not talking to a person about what keywords they use. You're using a platform to identify what keywords have the highest search volume and what has Google like figured out, to prioritize in the search results of that keyword. Like, so you can do that type of research too. So like channel research is what I call it, but like you can do different types of research to kind of understand a little bit about how the user thinks. You won't really know though until you actually talk to them. And I find 9 times out of 10, most markets, most industries, it's really, really easy actually to talk to prospects and to talk to customers. If you already have customers, great, start there, particularly customers who don't churn and like stay for a long time. If you don't have customers, if you're very, very early, who you built the product for, you can often source those folks from platforms like userinterviews.com, respondent.io. But there are platforms where you can source prospects and you can source people who fit your profile. And 9 times out of 10, like you're going to find that person. We've been running DemandMaven now. I've been running DemandMaven now for a long time. We've been conducting projects for a long time. And we've worked with SaaS from all shapes and sizes and different industries. And there's been only like 1 or 2 times where we haven't been able to source audience members, like prospects. One of them was for a dev platform because the requirements were extremely specific and like the team would just have a better time, evaluating, like doing their own outreach. And then the other time was like extremely affluent people.
Mm-hmm.
There was one time
high
where
net worth.
Yeah, like it was extremely high net worth with like liquid assets. And like that was also really specific, but also like those people aren't going to participate in research. Like you kind of have to know them. All that to say though, it's extremely rare that you can't source your ideal customer. Extremely rare. Cannot tell you how many times we've shocked founders with qualified prospects, right in front of them, talking about how they think about buying products like theirs. So anyway, identify channels though that they use when it comes to choosing software. When they go out and decide, when they have the aha moment of, oh, I need a solution, where do they go? Now, the most common thing is to Google search. But there are some products and markets where people don't think to Google search because they don't think, oh, there's a solution for that. So for example, this actually happened to me recently. I actually had this experience where I remember like thinking like, oh, I have this problem. This is annoying. This is frustrating. But I never once thought to look for it as a software. It didn't register to me that like software could fix this problem. I think it was like garden bed planting or like a planner for like a garden bed. And then I saw an ad for something from a company that I like a lot called Epic Gardening. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think that I could look for software for that. That's smart. Yeah, let me go do that. And then actually it triggered me to do some research. There are some industries where that is extremely common and people don't think that there's software that can solve their problem. This actually is there is an example that comes to mind. It's not a perfect example because some people did actually search, but there was a company that we worked with a long time ago, like several years ago now. They were in the coffee roasting, like production management software business. And the process of applying a recipe, so making the bean takes a certain way based on like the sourcing and the roasting, and also like if you blend it with other things. So you want to, as a roaster, create a consistent product every single time because that's what customers like. That's what they come to rely you for. You might need a software to help you manage, how much green product that you need to source and from where, when is it coming? And then also, what are you running out of that you need to replace and replenish? And then also, like, what are all the recipes so that you can create a consistent product every single time? Roasters, I remember this was years ago, so it's probably a little different now because markets change, they evolve. But I remember at the time, this was like 5 or 6 years ago, I remember talking to customers, and some of them had like they never even once considered that software could solve the problem. They were problem aware, but they weren't software aware, and they weren't aware that like they could look for a solution. But when they did look for a solution, one of two things happened. They either asked a roaster friend, "Hey, what are you using?" Or like, and really it wasn't even like, "What are you using?" because that would imply that they were aware of software, but like it was more like, "Hey, how are you managing or solving this problem?" And they're like, "I use this solution." And they're like, and sometimes it wouldn't be the client's product, like it wouldn't be them. Sometimes it would be a competitor. And but then they'd be like, "Okay, well, I can't afford that competitor." So then that would trigger research. And they'd be like, "Okay, let me go look up coffee roasting software, or like roasting management software, or roaster management software." And that would trigger Google searches. So that's an example of like someone might not be aware. And if that's the case, what you have to then do is identify, well, what are the problems? Are they problem aware? If so, what are the problems that they might try to solve that would indicate they are, that they might consider software and potentially be like a more qualified prospect? Now, the flip side is if they had never searched, like if that was more common, then you might be looking at more like outbound type channels. So, the first way is more inbound. That person is suddenly aware of a problem. They want to solve that problem. It's painful enough for them to solve it. And so now they're going to go look for solutions. Okay, well, maybe they Google search, maybe they ask for a friend, maybe they see ads. Technically, some people would consider that to be outbound, but maybe they see something or something triggers for them that they can like go and search for this thing. That creates a searching process. We would consider that to be more inbound. Outbound would be like you call them, you send them mail, you show up on their front door. That you think about like direct sales and door knockers. Like that's what outbound is. It could also be, I mentioned cold calling already, but there's also like you could send them an email. So there's things like that. But what's important is that you understand and identify where do they hang out and or how to reach them. Some audiences are not.
Whether or not they're looking for a solution, right? Like they could be, but they could also, coffee roasters could go to a certain conference every year. You want to know that.
Right, exactly. Right. And there actually were a few conferences. I remember we looked at that. There were a few conferences, but I think it was cost prohibitive at the time. It didn't fit that person's budget at the time, but that might be different now. So yes, whether they're looking for a solution or not, where do they hang out? And then if and when they do look for solutions, where do they look for solutions? Because those are two different buckets.
Right. And how? Like, what are they typing? Or that's like the keyword research and all that.
And there are two ways that you can understand this. The first is there are ways to do channel research where you don't have to talk to anybody. I mentioned you can do keyword research. You can do ads research. So you can identify is this a group on Facebook ads or LinkedIn ads or whatever? There are ways to do, back of the house channel research. Also, you can also just ask people, "Hey, where do you hang out? Do you use TikTok? Are you on Instagram? Do you use Facebook?" Some audiences will be like, "I'm literally never online." And those are the people that, okay, so you're going to probably have to think about offline stuff. And then when they are online, what are they doing? And again, this is kind of where we get into you are really understanding your target market and how and where and why they do things. And a lot of the times they'll literally just tell you. But you'll also hear people who are super online, So like SaaS marketers, chronically online. My original, my background was in SaaS marketing, and I'm chronically online all the time. Like, it's kind of hard to not find me. My inbox is super full of cold messages all the time. My LinkedIn inbox is full of DMs. I'm starting to get them on WhatsApp, and I'm kind of like, ew, go away. I'm starting to get them on WhatsApp. I haven't gotten them like on Facebook or Insta yet, but I'm sure it's a matter of time. In Threads, but like, I'm online. Like, it's, I am there. You can find me. It's pretty easy, actually. If you Google me, you will find stuff. I get emails actually like all the time, like, I saw your talk at blah blah blah, and then it's like, would you like to buy my thing? And it's like, no, go away. So yeah, like, and then there are some, again, like, who just aren't online at all, or like maybe they're kind of online, but they only go online when they want to search for things or whatever. Like, and people are going to give you anecdotal information, but it's still useful because it helps you prioritize. Okay, so that was the second prompt, or the second step, I should say. After that, we're going to have a long list of channels, or maybe it's a short list. And then we're going to have to get creative in two ways. If you have an audience, again, who's online, great. Online channels are going to be pretty available to you. If you have an audience that's not really online, some of the online channels are still going to be available to you. It might not be exhaustive, but you might have to consider maybe more like offline or like people-based channels. Things like conferences, partnerships. You could look at cold outreach. That's an easy one in theory, at least. That's an obvious one, I should say, that a lot of people think of. But think about these almost like distribution channels. Like, what are the things that maybe aren't online necessarily, but do get in front of the right person? If you have the budget, TV, billboards, there's a whole world of channels out there, which actually, looking at the list, we probably need to add that because we don't have traditional media on this list that I'm looking at right now. Let me go ahead and it's just so rare that a SaaS company that I'll say, no, I would say this is still rare. It's just rare that a SaaS company can afford traditional media. But all that to say, those are the types of things that you got to be thinking about. But if you really understand behavior, then ideas will naturally come to you. I'll give an example about a company that we just worked with in the, they are in the manufacturing space, and wood products manufacturing, very, very specifically. They're in the wood products manufacturing space. Their buyers are not online. I can very confidently say these are like some of the manufacturing engineers in the world. The way that they buy solutions is 100% of the time usually word of mouth. That's number one. They go and they ask their other manufacturing buddies. Because manufacturing is an old industry, it doesn't change very fast or very often. And so because of that, there are people who have spent decades in their careers in manufacturing, and certain tools and like software and platforms and equipment that they use are just like extremely pervasive, has a chokehold on the industry. And it's really hard for like new entrants into the market to kind of come in without having like a deep relationship. You kind of have to already have like a brand, so to speak, in this market, in this industry. Okay, so word of mouth is how they find other solutions and tools. They literally go ask their buddy, they go for beers, or they visit the plant or the site or the facility, and they're like, hey, like, that's cool. Like, what are you using? Or, oh, I have this problem. What are you doing like to solve that problem? That's how like software and things get moved around. The other way that they discover stuff are conferences. Associations and conferences and publications. There are a few like trade magazines and like trade conferences and things that they attend. A lot of the time that's like an excuse to go and drink with the buddies. But that's like part of the culture of being in manufacturing. And if you can afford to invest in those things, great. You know what I mean? This is related to the next thing that we're going to talk about here. What's fascinating though, okay, so those are the things that are surface level obvious. So if you do enough research, talking to that audience, they would tell you those things. So those are the things that they told us. Okay, yep, I'm never online. I avoid it like the plague, which I kind of debate because a lot of people actually do use Instagram and TikTok, but they don't like to admit it. And I think that's, part of the secrecy, I guess, of behavior. That's the risk of asking someone what their behavior is they might not tell you everything. They might not be actually truly honest. Like I would bet money that a lot of those dudes probably scroll through YouTube all the time because it's like manufacturing videos are kind of cool. And that's like an easy way to share them and like watch them. But anyway, they're probably not thinking of it in that way. But, surface level, like what they're able to tell us behaviorally, yep, I ask my buddy and then I go to conferences and I maybe like read a few magazines about trade stuff. But beyond that, I don't really do much. I don't Google search. And a lot of that's true. The Google search volumes for certain queries, very low, comparatively speaking to like other industries. Here's the channel though that we uncovered that is an opportunity for this company, but wasn't obvious until we had like talked about it, thought about it, and observed it. And one of them was, yes, they might ask their buddy, what do you use? But what was also very common was plant visits and facility visits from other plants and other facilities outside of this same organization will visit each other's plants and facilities. It's actually very common. So there was this one story that one of the customers told us about how they had just come back from visiting a friend's plant in Germany. Not the same company at all, totally different plant, totally different company, totally different org. But it's just like really common for like manufacturers and like wood products manufacturers and metal manufacturers to visit each other's sites because they're all like, it is kind of buddy. It's also, I've heard it described as a very incestuous industry where everybody's worked for everybody and worked with everybody. So there's almost like no, like, yes, like you compete, but you don't compete necessarily in terms of ops. Like that, for whatever reason, is very transparent and very, like people like brag about how good their operations are and they want to show others and they want to show like how cool their facilities are. And so people will visit each other's facilities, and those facilities, whether it's equipment or software or whatever it is that they have, there's branding everywhere. So you walk through these facilities and you see brands for all, like you see brand names everywhere, and you might even see like posters and like signage and like stuff shellacked to the floor. This is the, I don't even know what the brand names are now, but I'm just going to pick random. This is the Nikon floor, or like this is the Sony floor. This is a terrible example. I'm not a manufacturer, but I remember listening to this and I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Do they have like signage and brand stuff? Like when you do you know what these brands are like when you visit these facilities? And they're like, oh yeah, like they plaster them everywhere. And then it triggers us to ask questions about who this person is, or like, or who this brand is, and like how they're using it, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that is an opportunity. So this software, when they get every new client, there should be like okay, by the way, we'd love for you to be like our flagship client, and we're going to give you all the brand stuff. So we're going to post our brand over here, and we're going to give you like some signage. And if you could put this poster up, and if you could have this sign here, obviously still, meeting safety requirements because we want to be safe. But I was like, that's an opportunity, because every time someone visits our facility, they're going to be like, who's this? That's cool. What's that? And it was so funny because like in the project, they were like, oh, that is a great idea. We're ordering stuff right now. I was like, hell yeah. Anyway, so like that's the kind of thing that you have to observe. And that's the kind of thing that you wouldn't, maybe you could, do some deep thinking and reflecting and come up with it on your own. But I think it's really difficult if you're not actually talking to a customer. So that's a very long-winded example of how you can identify channels based on how you observe like what they're doing in their day-to-day, how they're doing it. And also too, you can come up with other ways to create visibility by paying attention to how they're using the channels that they are currently using. And also, what's a channel that might not seem like it's a channel because they don't think of it as a channel. So when you ask them, how do you look for software? How do you find those solutions? No one's probably thinking, well, yeah, I guess I did ask a question about that one particular software because I saw the logo like in the thing, like in the window. Like that might not, your customer might not think of that. So that's why you have to do a good job as a researcher coming up with, making those observations, jotting it down, and kind of, reflecting and thinking about, is that something that we can use, or is that relevant? The next is going to be, okay, so I mentioned earlier, like you have this long list of channels. The next is going to be like, now you have to prioritize them based on your average revenue per user and your budget. And this is kind of where it like, this is part of the frustration too of the question of, well, what are the best marketing strategies? And it's like, how much money do you have? Because if you're like a super highly funded like VC SaaS, you don't care about ROI efficiency, right? Like You will eventually, because, the assumption is obviously like you're going to hopefully hit profitability. Most funded companies don't, but ideally you're going to hit profitability at some point and then, really grow your EBITDA and make it amazing and then get acquired. Like that's like the hope for VC funded companies. But if you're not, which is the vast majority of SaaS companies, is that they're not funded. They're bootstrapped or they're, friend and family funded or whatever. They could also be indie funded. The vast majority of folks have to think about CAC efficiency, ROI efficiency when it comes to channels. So CAC, meaning the cost to acquire a customer, has to be somewhat efficient. And your first 1 to 2 years of life, not going to be efficient. It just won't. There's no way to make that efficient. And the reason why is because you're new and also like the market's not used to you yet. Like customers are taking a risk by being your customer in many cases, especially in the B2B world. Because if you've only been around for 1 to 2 years, who's to say you won't die next year? They don't know. So you are perceived as risky in that first 1 to 2 years. So any customers you do get, survivor bias. They're survivors, again. And the reason why, again, it won't be CAC efficient is because you don't have infinite money to be everywhere all at once. You're going to take things slow because you have to if you want to be sustainable. But the thing about CAC efficiency and ROI is we tend to not even see CAC efficiency or ROI until 6 to 12 months later, after consistently investing in marketing, no matter what the channel is. And that's assuming that you have great NRR, that you have incredible pricing and the pricing makes sense, and you have really good activation if you're PLG. If you're sales led, you have a great conversion rate, and your 6-month net revenue retention is great, and also your 12-month net revenue retention is great. So unless those things are true, your marketing is not going to be efficient for a while, because those things have to be true. Like if you're churning 20% month over month, your marketing's not going to be efficient no matter what you do. Like you're not getting enough money back to pay it off. And it's a losing game basically until you fix churn, until you fix business efficiency across like the rest of the product. That's why I have a whole episode that's like marketing is your least efficient growth lever, because all of those things have to be true if you want marketing to be like X, 10X, whatever the ROI or whatever it is. But chances are it's not going to be for the first 1 to 2, sometimes even 3, sometimes even 5 years. And the reason why is because the rest of the business is not efficient yet. So what has to happen, if that's the case, if that's our context, so then what we do next is we say, okay, well then when it comes to marketing, I have to prioritize channels based on what we can spend for at least 6-12 months on a consistent basis, assuming we get very little return back. And the reason why I say that is because unless the rest of your business is efficient, which if you're just starting out, it won't be, then you're going to have to do something to get customers. So you're going to have to spend something or invest something. If you don't have money, do you have time? And this is, of course, where the ultimate conundrum is of how a bootstrap technical founder, like what they invest in and how. I can say, from what I've seen folks do, and again, this is where like it just might be a bit slower, but can you learn SEO? Can you learn, like what can you learn and execute either yourself? AI has changed how we execute things, not necessarily what we execute in, but can you invest in like agents to help you scale something, create anything, move fast? It's not going to be perfect, but it'll be something. It's probably better than nothing to some degree, at least. And then from there, as you get more customers, you increase your budget of what you can invest in. And that again helps you create more customers. And assuming that you're also creating an incredible product, again, this is a hard balance to thread, don't get me wrong. But if you're also creating an incredible product, that creates its own growth loop, bringing people back to the product, because if your absolute best channel is going to be word of mouth, if you can create word of mouth of people just loving the shit out of what you've built for them and telling others, that's going to create more customers for free. So what you paid to acquire one customer has now expanded to create more customers. That's like the best growth loop ever. And what everyone should be like obsessive over, because that is the most efficient, that's the most CAC efficient channel ever on the planet, ever. Someone else recommending your product to someone else, whether personally or indirectly through case studies, testimonials, whatever it is. The lower your ARPU, the smaller your budget, the less you're going to be able to invest in. And also that has an impact on how much reach you're going to be able to have within that channel. So if you have a really low average revenue per user, let's say, and I'll use LTV to keep it simple. Let's say like the most a customer ever spends with you ever in the whole year of becoming a customer is like $100. That's small. If your LTV is like $100 in the whole year, $8 a month, whatever it is. Oh yeah, that's right. Because $1 million ARR is like $88,000 in MRR. So that tracks. I'm embarrassed I couldn't do that math. And you aren't going to be able to afford to hire like a sales team, for example. So like, someone's spending $8 a month. Okay, sales team is out for you. Cold outreach, potentially out. Like definitely out, actually. Super out. Maybe you can afford to send like a postcard, but that's compared like $8 a month. Like that's like it's a pretty high ratio.
I don't know. Stamps these days are pricey.
So what you might look at instead, depending on what you're selling, you're going to look at channels that have a very high network effect, but for a relatively low cost. I would say even ads would be really difficult at $100 LTV, $8 a month. You're probably looking at something like organic search, or depending on the product, like if you're like an app that charges like $8 a month, like you're looking at marketplaces, like you're looking for places that give you the maximum amount of distribution for as little of a cost as possible, and also is where your audience is, because if they're not there, then it doesn't really matter. But if the most someone is spending with you is like $3,000, you have a bit more budget to like, you have a bit more wiggle room. So now you can like start looking at channels like you probably still necessarily wouldn't look at outbound unless it was like super highly efficient cold outreach, like sales outbound, both social ads, organic search. Of course, you could look at paid search ads. There are all kinds of things that you can look at now. You might even be able to afford to spend on like conferences and certain types of partnerships, not all partnerships, but certain kinds. Like it opens up the world a bit. Like you have a bit more breathing room. We're going to talk, in potentially part 2, what that actually looks like, because we're 43 minutes in. All that to say, that's kind of what we're looking at next. And there are going to be some that right off the bat are going to be very obvious for you to invest in. And then there are going to be others that are like, if you do end up growing fast, you can add as you go. But I would actually even say, even adding more channels as you go isn't necessarily what I would recommend, because I think until like you're at $1 million and you have enough to invest in a team of people who can help you manage all these things, I think it's really hard for like if you're a solo founder with a very small team to manage like more than 3 channels at a time. Find the 1 to 3 and heavily invest in them until you get to that $1 million. When you get to $1 million, you can afford to invest in more. But I would even still say that if those first 3 are working, or whatever the number is, continue to invest in those, because it only gets more complicated and there are channel ceilings. Channels do hit ceilings, and it may not be worth the investment to get the payoff that it has. ARPU and budget. What I recommend for budget is, I like to think of it as like 20% of the revenue that you're making, even if it's a small number. If you're making $1,000 a month, 20% of that goes to a marketing budget of some kind. And if you don't have a whole lot of money, do you have time? Because that's another way that you can invest. And again, get those early customers. And I would say once you're at the like 10 to 15K MRR mark, you can afford, in theory, to spend a little bit more. It depends on your finances, obviously. And it also depends on your average revenue per user and your LTVs. So if you're selling a very low cost product, then you need a big market. You need like a lot of people coming in for you to make ends meet. If you're selling a higher cost product, then 5 customers could make your whole year. You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of math that you have to play. And also thinking about the channels that you can invest in.
Yes. Makes sense.
But the last is you campaign accordingly. Once you have your channel list, campaign. And what I mean by that is, what messages do you promote through those channels that get you the customer? So this is where I want to talk about the 5 levels of awareness. And the 5 levels of awareness, this is by Eugene Schwartz. It's an iconic awareness map. There are 5 levels. The first is unaware. Then there's problem aware, solution aware, product aware, and then some would consider the last to be most aware. Unaware, these are people who have no real concept of the problem that you solve or the desire that you fulfill. So people who are unaware may never consider, like they may never even be like, oh yeah, that's a problem for me. Like that's never a thing that they're thinking. It's funny because like truly unaware people, they are people, again, who just, they have no concept for like what it is that you do or that you solve. There's a product that we worked with where it's about like, gosh, it's like it's like operations management software for like massage therapists or clinic management software. There are massage therapists primarily that they target, and the massage therapist, if they're getting like less than 15 or so appointments a week, they usually just manage it by pen and paper. And they don't ever really think about the problem, because to them it's not a problem at all. And sometimes like they're aware of the problem. They know that if they were to get 20 more or like double the amount of clients, like it'd be really hard for them to manage. They probably would need something to like help them fix it. But there are some therapists that are just like, why would I need software? What? And those are the people who are like, they're truly unaware. But sometimes they're aware, like they're problem aware, but they don't actually feel the problem and they're not motivated to fix it. So that's different. So they're not technically unaware, in my opinion. They're just not motivated to find a solution, which is different. But those are people that you do want to kind of keep in your ecosystem and in your sphere, because eventually they to a certain threshold where they do have a problem, and now they feel it and now they want to solve it. So unaware people, these are people who, as the Caribbean say, are God bless the dead. And they are like, it has not even entered into their mind that this could be something that they fix, or that it even is something to fix. And that is different. Again, these people, you don't want to waste any of your time on. They're not, the thing about unaware people is that you have to spend a lot of energy trying to convince them that they have a problem. And most people don't feel like that's a thing. This is a bad example because most people are aware of therapy, but it's like convincing someone that they should go to therapy when they are 100% convinced that they shouldn't and that they don't need to. I don't have a problem. It's like my mom. She's like, I don't really think I need a therapist. I don't have problems. And I'm like, okay, mom. Like everybody needs a therapist, but okay. You're never going to convince them that they should go or that they should do it. The same thing with like unaware people for product. You're never going to convince them that they need this product. They have to kind of come to that on their own terms. Then there's problem aware. Problem aware people are our favorite. They're our second favorite. Problem aware people are people who are like, dang, it really sucks doing this by myself, or doing it in this way, or not doing this. There are a number of different problems that your product can solve. But these are people who are like, man, this actually is kind of painful. Like, I don't know if Ryan is going to keep this example in the episode, but I was lamenting earlier about finding a therapist. It's really freaking hard to find a therapist, actually. Like, being serious, it's super hard. There are platforms and like marketplaces, but like as a patient, as a potential patient, it's actually really hard for me to do the work to find someone. It's like really difficult, actually. And a lot of these platforms like have very big promises, but they don't actually deliver at the end, because like actually that person doesn't accept your insurance. Like, it's really frustrating. And it's like, but I like told you what my insurance was, and you put these people in front of me as like therapists to talk to, and I'm finding out now that like actually they don't accept your insurance. That was a lie. The cake is a lie. So anyway, it's actually really difficult sometimes to solve the problem, but I'm very problem aware. I'm like, damn, I really would love someone to talk to, but like I'm having a hard time finding a solution, or the solutions I have tried haven't worked. Problem aware people, they feel the pain and they are motivated to solve it. I think that's the most important part, is that they're actually motivated to solve it. Sometimes you get problem aware people who are not motivated to solve it. Those are people you're not going to be able to sell to. Even though they're problem aware, they don't care about solutions at the end of the day. Then there's solution aware, people who are like, I knew I had a problem and I looked for solutions. And they may have tried a number of things. So like pen and paper and Excel spreadsheets are the most common things that people start with in a lot of different software. Like a lot of software is actually competing with Excel or pen and paper. And then they start looking for solutions and tools. And sometimes they find things that kind of work or are close. In my therapy use case, for example, I found Alma, and I found, of course, I'm already aware of Psychology Today and like using that as like directory to find people. I know of BetterHelp. There are tons of solutions that I'm aware of, but only probably like one or two are actually going to solve my problem for me. And so people who are solution aware know what's out there. People who are product aware are aware specifically of your product, specifically. And then people who are most aware are people who have probably tried your product. Like they're actually like they've gone through maybe your help documentation, your onboarding experience. They've gotten into your product. They are most aware. But product aware is now they're aware of you specifically. So problem to solution to product, that's the journey that most people go through in terms of awareness. This is important because the channels that you use are likely going to be a little different based on the levels of awareness. Unaware people, we don't care about them. But not yet, at least. And to be fair, that's the majority of the market. So 99% of your market is going to be unaware. You're focused on the 1% or the 5%, whatever it is. And the 5%, they're either already problem aware, solution aware, product aware. And a lot of people are in that solution aware space where like maybe they're with a competitor right now, but they don't know about you and that you're actually a better fit. So people who are problem aware, the most common channels we see for this are going to be organic search and paid search, because also, AI search, because those people are actually searching for solutions. Sorry, that's actually not necessarily true. They're solution aware. They're doing that in solution aware, but if they're problem aware, they're probably searching the problem is what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Solution aware, now they're looking for solutions. So this is where directories of testimonials and things come up. And also like other things can kind of pop up for them too. And this is more from like their behavior perspective. This doesn't exclude things that we can do in their direction. That's more like outbound. So like we could run ads on people in this particular stage of their journey. You can do outreach on people in this particular stage of their journey. Like there's a lot of like ways that you can leverage levels of awareness and the channels that you put in front of them in that way. So anyway, when I say campaign accordingly, you're designing campaigns around these levels of awareness within your specific market context. So that's why I get so frustrated when people are like, Asia, what is the best marketing strategy? Like, what are the best marketing strategies? And I'm like, it's the one that your customers care about. And like, according to like the 5 levels of awareness, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's what company that I'm using, the company that I'm working with, like from a fractional CMO perspective, that exact marketing mix and channel strategy and campaign strategy isn't going to work perfectly for another SaaS company. It's a different audience who care about different things in a different market context, in a different software context, and with a completely different type of like levels of awareness context. Like unaware looks different for them than it does for another company in another industry. It just does. So when I say campaign accordingly, you align your channels to those levels of awareness. You get really clear on what it sounds like for your audience. And then you design campaigns. It could be ads campaigns about successful to you based on your ARPU, because don't forget about the ARPU part and the LTV part. But based on those levels of awareness and like what's actually happening in your customer's head as they go through those levels of awareness, now you're going to design campaigns. It could be as straightforward as like an SEO organic search sprint. It could also be as straightforward as a cold outreach sprint. It could be as straightforward as a partnership sprint. Like there are ways to design things that fit and align that journey. But you have to understand the journey. If you don't, you kind of you're shooting in the dark. And if you have infinite money, then don't listen to me. Spend your money and do your thing. But my guess is you don't. And like, this has to be sustainable. And if it's going to be sustainable, like we have to be strategic, or you get lucky, But like I said, we want to compete against luck. That's kind of the whole point.
I think going back to what you said at the beginning, it can sometimes feel hard to do that first fundamental, which is understand your target market.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because that's really what it's based on. So when that person asked, like, what's the best strategy? It's like, well, did you think through who your target buyer is?
Right. And where they hang out and how they make decisions and how they make ops, yeah, totally. Yeah. And I do feel like there are enough folks out there who maybe don't take that part of the process as seriously because they think maybe it's universal, and it's just so not. There are just so many different types of buyers and markets, and humans are just so complex. And I think it's wild to assume that like your batch of humans, like your ideal batch of humans is going to be the same as this other dude's batch of humans. And even amongst competitors, like even the competitors, like if you have like direct competitors, like you're both scheduling apps for massage therapists, even like your audience is still going to be a little different than theirs. And I know that's so wild and hard to believe, but I can just tell you from experience of having interviewed customers of competitors for my clients, of like, actually, I can see why they're the buyer of this product because of like their context is actually different than like our ideal buyer. And, you got to decide like if you want to open up your product to attract, those people better, or like adjust something in your business to attract those people better. I digress. Like, it's just it's a wild assumption to make. And I think it's just so pervasive. And that's like the disease that I think I'm like, I would like to eliminate this, please. It's so frustrating because the reality is like, there are people who do get lucky and they do just kind of do like, drops in the hat, or they commit to something very early and they're like, I'm going to make this work no matter what. And then it does. But for the rest of us, probably are going to have to be strategic. So I'll go quickly through what doesn't work and then I'll recap. Okay, what doesn't work? Just running ads. I would get this so often. So in my early days of DemandMaven, I would work with a few SaaS companies and I remember they'd be like, we just want you to run our ads and like, get our very first customers that way. And don't get me wrong, ads, out of all the channels, ads are definitely the fastest. Well, word of mouth would be faster if your market does that often. But if your market doesn't do that often, ads, search ads specifically, and then also for some businesses, ads, one of the fastest channels that you can execute ever. You can run a campaign in like minutes now. Like you don't even, especially with AI, you can have Claude draft a full-blown like campaign, create the graphics for you. Like there's almost no excuse to not. But I will say this doesn't always work for everybody. One, because of the ARPU part of the conversation. So if you can't afford to run ads, it's not going to work for you. Like I don't want to put like a limit because you can optimize campaigns down to the bone if you need to, but it requires it's kind of expensive to do that. You're still going to spend quite a bit of money. What I tell a lot of my clients is like, you're going to spend at least 30 to 50K just knowing if that channel works for you. And that's from like optimizing, because chances are you're not going to get it right the first time. You're going to have to test a lot of different types of graphics, different funnels, different landing pages, the copy on those landing pages, the copy of the ads. All of that takes a lot of time and money. And you really don't actually see the algorithm work well for you unless you're spending at least 5 to 10K per month. You add a contractor on top of that managing it, and then you add 6 months and you're probably in for 30 to 50K right there. And that's assuming you do it all right. If you don't do it right, you could be doing it for a year. And then I forgot about the attribution part. Then you have to get the attribution right. And if you don't have that dialed in, then you actually don't even know if it works for you or not. So that's why I say ads, I know it's so appealing because you can literally just like start a campaign and like get it running in 2 seconds. But it's not always, I'd say like 7 times out of 10, it doesn't work. 30% of the time it does for certain companies. Some of my favorite client projects I ever worked on, that's exactly what happened. Like, remember, like we ran like a few ad campaigns and we were like, damn, this works actually. Like we got our very first customers and like next thing you know, we're 4 million in ARR. Like it does work for some companies, but the vast majority it won't. Or at least not yet. So that's the other caveat is if you increase your prices, if you go after a higher paying audience, ads might work for them or work for that particular segment, but it might not work day one. And I think the thing about that is like you do have to invest quite a bit for a while before it like matures. And also that's assuming that the rest of your funnel is on point. So you're going to spend 30 to 50K probably to like really test that channel. And what also has to be true is your activation is on point, your retention's on point, and your pricing is on point. If all those things kind of suck or like aren't really dialed in, you're going to light that money on fire. So what I often recommend is, I mean, you can try this, but be wary of spending this amount of money and committing to this maybe without realizing it and not doing any of the hard work of optimizing the rest of the funnel. And I think that's kind of where like ads kind of become they're like a thorn in my side a little bit because they are cool. You can spin it up like in 2 seconds, but is it going to work for you? TBD. You might get lucky, but chances aren't. So do I think it's worth testing and trying? Sure. But again, I would only say yes if you know for a fact that your audience is researching something solution aware. You could do problem aware type searches and do ads on those, but I find instead of paying money for that, you could instead do organic search. And I think like ranking for keywords that are like problem related keywords. And I would say now it's going to be AI SEO because Google is kind of eating up a lot of those informational keywords with Google search overviews. So even then I would say like you're investing in something organic and it's slower, but it's way more cost effective. And it's a little bit less risky because Again, like you're not going to spend 50K on accident on search, especially if it's something that you can do yourself. So that's kind of what I have to say about that.
Yeah.
There's also like asking around online for channels. And again, I would never shoot the messenger, but the pervasive question to me is like, yeah, yes, founders want quick and easy things to execute. They want the silver bullet. They want the fast answer. But I just very strongly believe, and mostly because I've heard this from founders, I know a lot of my clients have complained to me about this, but just asking around online, like, hey, like, what are you guys doing for this? I cannot tell you how many times like founders have told me that they've asked their peers and friends and audiences and networks, hey, what channels should we consider? And they come back with ideas and they're like, great, I'm going to go execute that right now. And then they do, and it never pans out. Can't tell you how many times like, founders have been advised just to do LinkedIn or just run some meta ad campaigns or like just do cold outreach. And it fails miserably because there wasn't any actual work done to validate that channel. And then also to really understand from the customer and prospect side, how should that channel be executed from the perspective of this company in this market context. That's why that doesn't usually work. The same thing is true for going to conferences, attending talks, especially those like, I'm going to give you 5 tactics to implement right now in your LinkedIn campaigns, or I'm going to give you 5 things to execute marketing wise in your blah, blah, blah. We love a tactical talk. Don't get me wrong. Like, and I think I understand and realize how biased I am saying this because my background was in marketing and I would say it's more growth now generally, but which is a different function technically. But I get where folks are coming from, especially if you are like in deep need of tactical ideas. Like there's comfort in tactics. Like there's a lot of comfort in tactics and there's a lot of discomfort in strategy.
Right.
But tactical talks are comforting, especially when you go to a conference and you're like, yes, I want action items. It's like, okay.
Yes, I want steps to follow.
I want steps to do. And it's like, I get that. Some of it is extremely valuable. The bulk of it is not going to work for you. And I'm saying this hearing from my clients, yeah, I did that shit. Or yeah, I remember that talk. I did that. It didn't work for me. Like I cannot tell you how many times I've heard that and how many precious hours of energy have been wasted and money have been wasted because you get super hopped up and inspired by the tactical thing, the silver bullet, the like just do these things. It's going to 10x your whole life. And then like you get home and you do it and then you're like, I don't know what it did. And a lot of times you can't even measure it because you don't actually have like any, real like analytics implemented or whatever. So all I have to say, like and this is kind of where the survivor bias pops up because there are people who will do it. They'll do the thing and they'll get lucky. They'll just get lucky. Like it just so happens, like, yes, that talk was specifically for you, but for the rest of the 1,000 people in the room, not going to work. And, and that's kind of where you have to be discerning. You have to use discernment very, very intimately. I think the smart founders are very discerning and strategic. And when they hear about a channel and its application, they don't immediately think, I'm going to execute the playbook exactly how this person recommended it. They think, how can I apply or modify this to fit my audience and the problem that we solve within the context that we're in? That's what a smart founder does. First-time founder or someone who maybe is like new, who've never done it before, they're going to implement the playbook exactly. But I think the smart founder doesn't implement it exactly unless they do feel like that's the best application. They do their research. They think about it a bit more. They are highly intentional. But again, that would require being strategic and not just, go heads down and execute, because there's comfort in that. And I think that's part of why there's like this pervasive myth of like, well, there's like a set of strategies that I should be executing that would work for me no matter what. It's like, well, no, like that you've got to build that for you. Like you've got to build your own playbook. You're looking for a secret master playbook that, other companies who have made it have like executed and it doesn't exist. I'm telling you right now. Like there are smart strategic decisions that businesses have made that work for them. And now you've got to find yours. So, okay, I'll leave it at that. The simple framework. At the end of the day, you're asking these questions and you're answering them based on the work that you're going to do to really understand this. Because if you don't want to waste 50K, if you don't want to waste 6 to 12 months, if you want this to go smoothly and not super painfully, If you don't want to be lulled by silver bullets and, quick tactic execution thinking, if you want to learn how to be more comfortable with strategic thinking, I want you to think about these questions. First, who are you actually trying to acquire? And get very tightly specific, as tightly as you possibly can. Small businesses, I'm targeting small businesses. Way too general. You've got to get super specific. I am targeting landscaping companies in the South in the United States that are making at least this much money and have at least this many staff. That's specific. Don't care about all the other million bajillion small businesses, or I'm targeting mom and pop shops. Too generic. I'm targeting nail salons in major cities on the East Coast that have at least 10 staff members. That's specific. Get specific. I'm targeting SaaS marketers who have budgets of at least $1 million that are PLG in the United States, or UK, Canada, and the US, or APAC region, or whatever. Get specific. Who are you actually trying to acquire? And get real dogged about that. Too generic if you say, United States therapists. No. Specific. So, who are you actually trying to acquire? What do their 5 levels of awareness sound like when looking for your product? What does it sound like when they're problem aware? What does it sound like when they're solution aware? And what does it sound like when it's product aware? So when they're aware of your product. And then what campaigns would you need to build to attract those people across those levels of awareness? Where do those people hang out? So again, I gave those really specific examples. I'm targeting, therapists. I'm specifically targeting LMFTs in the United States, in these specific states, because maybe I don't know, your product has a thing that makes you look at specific types of therapists who specialize in trauma or, ADHD. Super specific, right? Where do those people hang out? How do they decide to buy software? Specifically your software. You're selling a SaaS. How do they decide to do that? Do they ask friends? Do they look up reviews? Do they Google search? What do they do? Do they go on TikTok and ask all of their followers? What happens about, how does that actually look? And then you're going to get ideas for what to do. If you just answered those questions, you're already going to get ideas, especially if you do the work to answer them well. If you actually talk to them, if you actually do the research, you're going to have ideas. You're not going to not have ideas. You absolutely will. The last question to answer is, now, what can I afford to invest in consistently? Not drop in the hat, do it in 2 seconds, see what works, but you consistently invest in this thing for at least, this is going to scare you, but at least 12 months. If it's as small as you write and post a blog post, and I say you, it doesn't have to be Rook, it could be AI, but maybe you publish a blog post 2 times a month, every month for 12 months. That would cost nothing except for your time. So what you can afford to invest, it could be time, it could be money, it could be human capital, which would kind of be money, but still it could be human capital. Maybe you hire a contractor and they do it, or a consultant, or an agency if you can afford it. But what can you afford to consistently invest in for at least 12 months? And the reason why I say 12 is because a lot of founders take the approach of, well, I'll invest in it if I see return. But I mentioned earlier, you probably won't see return because you're early. You won't see CAC efficiency. If anything, you'll break even. What you invest, you get back. That's very common for businesses 1 to 2 years in, or businesses less than $1 million. If you've been in the game for longer, I don't believe the market just doesn't move fast enough for you to execute something for 2 weeks and then drop it. You're not going to see return on that anyway. Who saw it? Nobody. Your reach is probably small. So commit to 12 months mentally, but maybe you start seeing signs in the first 3 to 4 months of executing something. And that's a positive sign. Some teams see results in as little as a month, but your mileage may vary. It depends on how fast your market moves. If you have a slow ass market, guess what? Marketing is going to be a little slow. And there are ways to accelerate it, but chances are you won't until you're mature in your industry. But you really have to be mentally prepared for investing in something consistently, understanding that you probably are going to break even until everything becomes CAC efficient, until you have longevity in your industry, until people can trust that you're going to be around here for a while. Because I mentioned earlier, a lot of why marketing and acquisition is slow in the early days is because you're new. You're the risk. You know what I'm saying? You and your product, you're actually the risky one. You're new in town. And people are I don't know who that is, and I don't know if I can trust him, and I don't know anybody else who knows him. That's why it's slow. Right. Until you build that brand equity in your industry, in your market, things are going to be slow and you're probably not going to see like, CAC ROI or CAC efficiency. That's why I like every time a founder says that to me, I kind of chuckle a little bit because I'm like, there's like, you're not like, maybe you get lucky, but you probably won't. You'll probably break even the first 1 to 2 years until everything matures, improves, gets better. And that's assuming the rest of your business is efficient. We didn't even talk about activation or net revenue retention or any of the other things that make acquisition actually extremely inefficient. So those are the questions that you have to ask and then actually commit to answering for real. And when you commit to answering those questions strategically and for real, you will come away with 2 to 3 very clear ideas that strategically make sense, that you likely can invest in. And now you've got to go heads down and do it and try it. And you might need to make adjustments. You absolutely will need to make adjustments. I take that back. You will have to iterate. Like there's no, I wish there were shortcuts, but there really aren't. And the growth hacking days, I think are they're not long gone, unfortunately, but it's just not the same environment as it was. We have saturated our markets. There are far more competitors now than there ever were. New markets certainly are emerging, but SaaS isn't necessarily jumping on those like as quickly as they are like the AI market, for example. So that's what needs to get answered. And now if I can convince Kim to record a part 2.
Let's do it. We're here.
Talk about channels. Okay. All right, cool. Stay tuned for part 2. Thanks again for listening. Part 2, we're going to talk about the channels specifically, because I know that's what everyone wants to hear. They're like, just give me all the channels. And it's like, okay, sure. But like your mileage may vary according to your context. What's going to work for some people, it's not going to work for everybody. But all right. Thanks again for listening. And yeah, we'll catch you on the next one.